Hi, this is the She Unit Group. There is a wide variety output per worker around the world. As a relatively poor region, Sub-Saharan Africa have a low economic growth rate due to wars, political instability, natural disasters, sudden stops in capital inflows, etc. Also, the production unit level is low. Our video focuses on the Sub-Saharan Africa region to look deep into the situation of low productivity and interpret why is this case, how can we improve by introducing policies. First, let us introduce the situation there. The sluggish growth of output per worker in Sub-Saharan Africa widens the region's labor productivity gap relative to the global efficiency benchmark and aspirational development benchmark. These two benchmarks are indicators that help us understand the productivity level. From the graph, we can see that there is a decreasing trend for average output per worker in Sub-Saharan Africa relative to that of the US. By 2017, this number decreased to 7.7%, which reveals very low labor productivity. However, the labor productivity in the EAP5 countries increased by 20% in decades and exceeded Sub-Saharan Africa around 1979, which indicates the age loss of Sub-Saharan Africa. This contrast is due to differences in the pace of capital accumulation and growing divergence in TFP between the two regions. Overall, the labor productivity of Sub-Saharan Africa falls far short of its aspirational development benchmark. Second part, let us consider the sources of productivity growth. Accumulation of tangible assets and human capital is an important part of productivity growth. Human capital can be measured as labor quality gains, so higher quality labor leads to a higher level of productivity, and investments in education can increase high quality human resources. The growth of total factor productivity is also one of the most important sources. It can be interpreted as, through technological innovation, the ability to combine labor and capital more effectively over time, so technical change can drive long-run productivity growth.
The third part, let's talk about how to estimate the evolution of productivity over time. The report documents the region's productivity trends on international, regional, and country level to accomplish this goal. It compares Sub-Saharan Africa's productivity and growth to that of other areas, as well as to that of several Africa country groups, which are categorized according to their natural resources ability and fragility. Overall, three different levels of data aggregation are used to analyze productivity trends, which are aggregate, sectoral, and establishment. First is aggregate level. The report estimates the level and the growth of labor and multi-factor productivity in Sub-Saharan Africa. This report not only describes labor productivity trends in the region, but also identifies the sources of continuing differences in labor productivity between Sub-Saharan Africa and the benchmark country. For this purpose, the development accounting framework is used to decompose differences in labor productivity levels into differences in input, intensity, and productivity efficiency. Next is the sectoral level. Current research generally divides economic activity into three main sectors: agriculture, industry, and services. In the industrial sector, it distinguishes between manufacturing and non-manufacturing activities. In the services sector, it classifies different activities as market or non-market services. Using data on labor productivity and labor shares, this report examines the transfer of resources between sectors. Last is the establishment level. It identifies and discusses the different policies and institutions that affect productivity and drive resources mismatches between farms and firms in Sub-Saharan Africa. Specifically, it discusses a comprehensive but non-exhaustive set of policy and institutions that are categorized according to these potential sources of misallocation. However, there are some problems with the data. The main challenge for empirical work in less developed countries and economies with large informal sector is the issue of data quality. At the national level, the Statistics Office does not have sufficient financial and human resources to obtain real macroeconomic data. At the same time, the agriculture sector has a large share and is vulnerable to price fluctuation, both domestic and international. Some of other causes of inaccurate data as already shown in the slide.
Okay, the next part is about the main sources of productivity gap. Well, firstly, I want to introduce the definition of total factor productivity, which can be interpreted as growth through technological innovation and efficiency achieved by enhanced labor skills and capital management. Specifically, higher TFP means more production for the same amount of capital and labor. And here is the production function that leads to the TFP, and the one we need to talk about later. Well, Y is the real output per worker. K over Y is the capital output ratio, and Z, which is A to the power of 1 over 1 minus alpha, is TFP measured in labor augmenting units. For the main sources of productivity gaps in Sub-Saharan Africa, the first source is the differences in the stock of physical and human capital. The second one and the third one is the differences in factor accumulation and TFP. Generally, there is a shift in the narrative of what explains the persistent gap in labor productivity between Sub-Saharan Africa and the United States. it has shifted from an undercapitalization story, reflected by the first source, like lower capital output ratios, which is K over L, to a production inefficiency story, reflected by the second source, like lower relative TFP. In turn, the lower TFP levels could be attributed, among other things, to resource misallocation of these resources, reflected by the third source, which translates into an even lower level of labor and total factor productivity.
Here we come to the fifth part. Policies and institutions lead to low productivity and possible ways to improve. In this section, we're going to discuss market imperfections, statutory provisions, and financial market imperfections, how they lead to current aggregate productivity loss in Sub-Saharan Africa. And we will also raise and assess possible ways to improve the productivity. Market imperfections is a potential source of loss of productivity across Sub-Saharan African countries. I will first discuss land rental market imperfections. It has been shown that resource misallocation is greater in the regions with farmers without rental markets, and it will lead to loss in total factor productivity revenue. To address this issue, first, redistribution of land is needed. Currently, most farms in Sub-Saharan countries are operating on less than 2 arcs of land. However, due to data, the most productive farm should operate on almost 6 arcs on average. Thus, the land should be redistributed to achieve higher allocation efficiency. In addition, the rental market for land and capital should also be developed. A well-functioning rental market will not only lead to substantial increase in agricultural productivity, but will also have positive influence on farmers' decision to invest in technology to further boost the productivity. There is another type of market imperfection, which is information asymmetry about price dispersion and weather. Bad weather can shock productivity and worsen allocative inefficiency in imperfect input markets in Sub-Saharan Africa. To address the information asymmetry, digital technologies like early warning systems can be introduced to help farmers in Sub-Saharan Africa to manage climate shocks. Next, we will discuss a statutory provision, size-dependent tax policy, like simplified tax for small taxpayers in Mozambique. The tax taxing firms based on scale of production, which is preferential to smaller firms, so firm owners are disincentivized to firm growth, leading to contraction of output. By removing the size-dependent tax and make the tax system size-neutral, the low and middle-sized firms have incentive to increase their total factor productivity. They will also have higher incentives to invest in productivity-enhancing technologies, which can boost the output and raise per capita income. Following size-dependent tax, targeted input subsidy programs will be assessed. It is a measure used by many African governments to boost the fertilizer use. In short run, it can increase production and enhance food security. However, it is lack of persistent yield response and have crowding out effect. Governments can implement the subsidies smartly to address this issue. It includes but not limited to doing agricultural research and development, water management and extension, getting input from agroecologists, and educating farmers.
There are 3 problems that's caused by the trade policy. The first problem is that tariff policies in Sub-Saharan African countries have caused resource allocation distortions among manufacturing firms. The government then issued a new strategy to address this issue, stating that reducing or eliminating these inefficiencies through trade reforms promotes more efficient factor allocation across enterprises. And then the second problem is about the preferential incentives. From 1996 to 2002, FOP import substitution policies provided a variety of incentives to enterprises in key areas, including tax exemptions, loss carry-forwards, and better law availability. Inefficient enterprises were able to enter or survive as a result of these measures. The repeal of these rules later aided the exit of less productive enterprises and encouraged firms to grow more quickly. The third issue concerns about the trade reforms. After liberalization, exporting enterprises' productivity grew faster than non-exporting firms. To address this issue, countries have agreed to reduce tariffs. 73% of the increase in Ethiopian manufacturing productivity was due to resource reallocation as a result of decreased tariffs. The final institutional source of misallocation is financial market imperfections. The first issue is that low and lower middle-income nations are still limited access to formal financial services and foreign financing. To address this issue, the financial development promotes economic growth by increasing TFP growth and improving resource allocation. The second issue is that financial limitations may contribute to resource misallocation within countries. In the lack of strong property rights, businesses may be unwilling to reinvest their revenues. To address this issue, financial frictions can have an impact on productivity by affecting the amount and dispersion of the marginal product of capital. To sum up, the introduction of new policies can help South Africa's economy develop faster and get rid of poverty as soon as possible.